host has spent decades studying the Bible in the original languages. He holds degrees from the University of Wisconsin, Moody Bible Institute, Asbury Theological Seminary, and Bethel Theological Seminary. With the help of some of his friends, in 1994, Dr. Rakow founded a national volunteer ministry to hunters. He is an author, dog trainer, and speaker. Tom served as a full-time pastor for 36 years. Now here is your host, Dr. Tom Rakow.
Thanks for joining us here on the Rakow Publications Quill. During today's program, we're going to be talking about what the Bible has to say about hunting and in regards to the hunting language that is used in the scriptures would indicate that hunting was taking place. And we'll be looking at some of those weapons that are referred to in one way or another in the Bible. I hope that you enjoy today's program. There has been a general consensus among many notable Bible scholars that hunting played a relatively minor role among God's chosen people during the days when the events recorded in the scriptures were taking place. In his book, The Old Testament World, Martin Noth saw that both, quote, hunting and fishing were of minor importance in Palestine, unquote. And again, conservative scholar Merrill C. Tenney concluded in the Zondervan Pictorial Encyclopedia of the Bible, quote, the Israelites were settled pastoral people rather than nomads who lived by hunting and plundering. Consequently, the language that they used reflected only the occasional use of weapons. Allusions to the phenomena of hunting are largely figurative, unquote. Well, actually, I believe that the Bible has quite a bit to point us in the direction that hunting was a common practice among God's chosen people. Now, the inception of hunting must ultimately be traced back to God himself. You know, it was God who told Noah, quote, everything that lives and moves will be food for you, just as I gave you the green plants. The world was initially vegetarian. Just as I gave you the green plants, I now will give you everything, Genesis 9:3. Along with this, the Lord instructed Noah and his family regarding their behavior as it related to the taking of another creature's life. Quote, but you must not eat meat that has its lifeblood still in it. And for your lifeblood I will surely demand accounting. I will demand an accounting from every animal, and from each man too I will demand an accounting for the life of his fellow man. Genesis 9:4-5. You know, there's a distinction between humans and animals. Humans alone have been made in the image of God. We're told that in the book of Genesis. We're told that in James. We're told that throughout the scriptures. And there were hunting regulations that were included. This would, to me, be one of the major flags that would say that hunting was more well known and practiced among the Hebrews than many of the scholars of the past have thought. You know, the inclusion of certain passages in the Old Testament, in the first 5 books, the Torah, not only reveals that hunting was a legitimate practice for the Hebrews, but that hunting would eventually become common enough in the Holy Land to require specific guidelines. The Israelites were told how to treat the blood of a harvested animal. In Leviticus 17:13-14, here's what that divine hunting regulation says. Any Israelite or any alien living among you, you know, that would be anybody coming in outside of the Jewish nation, any Israelite or any alien living among you who hunts any animal or bird that may be eaten must drain out the blood and cover it with earth, because the life of every creature is its blood. That is why I have said to the Israelites, you must not eat the blood of any creature, because the life of every creature is its blood. Anyone who eats it must be cut off, unquote. That's from Leviticus 17, verses 13-14. And they were also told what wildlife was permissible to eat. And this list included the deer, the gazelle, the roe deer, the wild goat, the ibex, the antelope, and the mountain sheep. And that's Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 5. So here there was this divine regulation. There was also this list of permissible game that could be hunted. And you also have hunting language in the Bible that would indicate that hunting was pretty common. Otherwise, why would the writers use terms that involve hunting to communicate the truth of what God was saying? You see, this is another factor that conveys the possibility that hunting among the ancient Hebrews was more widespread than has been previously assumed. These uses of hunting terms or hunting imagery would seem to indicate that the initial hearers or readers of the message understood what the writers were talking about. It showed a familiarity by the writers as well as the listeners of the message that was being communicated when hunting terminology was used. When we come back, I'm going to be opening up to Psalm 57, and we'll look at several verses in that particular psalm by David in which he used some terminology that had to do with hunting methods, different terms that were used, and he applied that to his situation. And I think you'll enjoy this part of the message.
What does the Bible have to say about hunting? In Hunting in the Bible, a scripture safari by Dr. Tom Rakow, find out how people hunted in Bible times. Learn about the existence of ancient hunting lists. Acquire a knowledge of the scriptures with regards to God's concern for both animals and birds. Discover specific hunting regulations found in the Old Testament. Gain insight into what the scriptures have to say concerning modern-day hunting practices, and much more. This book will help you to become an expert in knowing what the Bible has to say about hunting. To order your copy of Hunting in the Bible, a scripture safari, go to the Rock Dove Publications website, rockdove.com. Visit rockdove.com today.
We're talking about hunting imagery used in the Bible and references to hunting that would imply that hunting was taking place more widespread than has been previously assumed by many scholars. You have that divine regulation in Leviticus 17. You have that list of permissible game in Deuteronomy 14 and other places as well. And in Psalm 57, we see some of the way this hunting terminology is used. It's a Psalm of David, and the inscription says, and that kind of sets the stage for the writing of the psalm, gives us the background to it. For the director of music to the tune of Do Not Destroy of David a Miktam, when he fled from Saul into the cave. So this was a very difficult time for David, and he writes this psalm, this song, "Have mercy on me, my God, have mercy on me, for in you I take refuge. I will take refuge in the shadow of your wings until the disaster is past. I cry out to God Most High, to God who vindicates me. He sends from heaven and saves me, rebuking those who hotly pursue me. God sends forth his love and his faithfulness. I am in the midst of lions. I am forced to dwell among ravenous beasts." You know, you think of him in a cave, and I've been to En-Gedi where David hid out, and boy, there are just numerous caves you can look up, and it would be very difficult to find someone. And you think about beasts being in the caves. Well, he's talking about humans, and he said, "I am in the midst of lions. I am forced to dwell among ravenous beasts, men whose teeth are spears and arrows, whose tongues are sharp swords. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. They spread a net for my feet. I was bowed down in distress. They dug a pit in my path, but they have fallen into it themselves." And then he goes on. But as we look at this passage, we see a variety of weapons mentioned here. David, who we are told had fled from Saul to a cave, cries out to God. He refers to those who are seeking to destroy him as men who are ravenous beasts. He states that these are men whose teeth are spears and arrows. He's using weapons, whose tongues are sharp swords. In this case, the weapons mentioned are spears, arrows, and sharp swords. And David goes on to reference a pit and a net. Sometimes a pit would be dug to catch an animal, and nets used to catch birds and, of course, to catch fish. In verse 6, he describes the action of those seeking to destroy him. They spread a net for my feet. I was bowed down in distress. They dug a pit in my path, but they have fallen into it themselves. These are tools or devices often used for capturing wild animals. In this case, David feels like an animal being pursued. In another part of the Bible, David tells King Saul, who is pursuing him, the king of Israel, he says, the king of Israel has come out to look for a flea, as one hunts a partridge in the mountains, 1 Samuel 26:20b. And in similar fashion, the writer of the book of Lamentations says, those who were my enemies without cause hunted me like a bird. So obviously the activity of hunting was well known enough that individuals could make reference to it. And here is David making reference to being hunted. I think of a prophecy regarding the Babylonians in Isaiah 13:14, like a hunted gazelle, like sheep without a shepherd. They will all return to their own people. They will flee to their native land. But using the idea of hunting imagery. In Proverbs 1:17, here's what the writer of wisdom says, usually attributed to Solomon, David's son, how useless to spread a net where every bird can see it. And Ecclesiastes 9:12, again, usually attributed to Solomon, David's son, moreover, no one knows when their hour will come, as fish are caught in a cruel net, or birds are taken in a snare, so people are trapped by evil times that fall unexpectedly upon them. He's using hunting imagery to convey truth about the way in which we may not know how long we have, and just like that, our life can be taken away. Amos 3:5, does a bird swoop down to a trap on the ground when no bait is there? Does a trap spring up from the ground if it has not caught anything? That's Amos 3:5. The writer is using terminology that would have been familiar, obviously familiar to the writer himself, but also to those who would receive the message. Proverbs 29:5 and 6, those who flatter their neighbors are spreading nets for their feet. Evildoers are snared by their own sin, but the righteous shout for joy and are glad. So here you have the idea of nets and snares and things like that. In Proverbs 6:5, the wisdom writer warns about taking a pledge of security for another person. He says, my son, if you have put up security for your neighbor, if you have shaken hands in pledge for a stranger, you have been trapped by what you said and snared by the words of your mouth. So do this, my son, to free yourself. Since you have fallen into your neighbor's hands, go to the point of exhaustion and give your neighbor no rest. Allow no sleep to your eyes, no slumber to your eyelids. Otherwise saying, you just get out of that agreement. He says this in verse 5 of Proverbs 6:5, free yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, like a bird from the snare of the fowler. You think of a gazelle or a deer being trapped. He tried to get away, tried to get out, or a bird being ensnared, tried to get out of it. In Proverbs 7:21-23, the writer warns about the wayward woman and not to give in to her. With persuasive words, she led him astray. She seduced him with her smooth talk, talking about this stupid young man. All at once he followed her like an ox going to the slaughter, like a deer stepping into a noose, till an arrow pierces his liver, like a bird darting into a snare, little knowing it will cost him his life. The amount of hunting imagery that is used is incredible. And here we find in Psalm 57 some references, not directly pertaining to hunting, but using that imagery to convey truth. We know that, as we pointed out earlier, that ultimately our world was vegetarian, and after the flood, God opened up the door for humans to partake of animals. And we know that Esau was a very skillful hunter. Now, he was also a godless man. We're described that not because he was a hunter, but because he sold his birthright and did various immoral things. But we're told this in Genesis 25, 27 to 28, talking about Jacob and Esau. The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So here, Jacob and Esau, we see there was this favoritism that took place. One parent favored one son more than the other, and the other parent favored one son more than the other. In Genesis 27, 2 to 4, remember when basically Jacob was used some deception along with his mother, and Esau went out to hunt, and during that time, he basically had the blessing taken from him. In Genesis 27, 2 to 4, Isaac said, I am now an old man and don't know the day of my death. Now then, get your equipment, your quiver and bow, and go out to the open country to hunt some wild game for me. Prepare me the kind of tasty food I like and bring it to me to eat so that I may give you my blessing before I die. That's in Genesis 27. You know, during the days of King Solomon, hunting was obviously taking place, because in 1 Kings 4, 22 to 23, we're told about Solomon's daily provisions. Solomon's daily provisions were 30 cores of the finest flour and 60 cores of meal, 10 head of stall-fed cattle, 20 of pasture-fed cattle, and 100 sheep and goats, as well as deer, gazelles, roebucks, and choice fowl. So not only were domesticated animals a part of that daily provision, but so were wild game animals, and obviously that became a part of what was taking place during that time. There was a big bureaucracy, lots of people, and so there's a lot of food needed, and included in that was wild game. So the fact is, we have other passages as well that make reference to the hunting imagery and the various weapons that were used. No doubt pits and snares, the bow and arrow. I would say also the slingshot, that was used in military as well. And I remember when I was a student at Asbury Seminary, G. Herbert Livingston, who was an Old Testament professor, he was actually my favorite professor while I was a student at Asbury Seminary. And he brought into class, he also was an archaeologist, and he brought into class a slingstone. And, we often think of a piece of gravel, but this is more like a cue ball, when you play pool, like a cue ball, about like that. And can you imagine getting hit between the eyes with one of those? No wonder Goliath came down. And there were other individuals that were skilled in using the sling. They could come within a hair's breadth, we're told. And the fact is, there were a variety of different weapons that were used, and yet there was a divine regulation of how that harvested animal was to be taken care of. There was also a divine regulation as far as what wild game was permissible to harvest. And so there's much more that we could say about that. But I hope when you read the Bible, you'll look for some of that imagery, especially in the Psalms. David was a man of the outdoors. He was a shepherd boy who became a king, spent years being pursued by King Saul, lived in a very difficult part of the world to be pursued around, limited water resources, and very hot, very difficult. He was a true outdoors person, and he used hunting imagery in the Psalms, as did other writers. And I believe that they did that because hunting was more prevalent than we would could be led to believe by some of the scholars of the past. Well, I hope that you enjoyed today's program. I hope you'll listen again next time.
You have been listening to the Rock Dove Publications podcast with your host, Dr. Tom Rakow. This program has also been brought to you by the Quilted Arrow, home of intelligent, stylish, field-bred English pointers with bloodline streams from Hall of Fame champion Guardrail. Thank you so much for listening. Now, this is Beth Rakow inviting you to join us again next time on the Rock Dove Publications podcast.